practice system is not a very good check of quality. So with surgery, there's really no check to show that something's safe and effective, or a very limited check. With deep brain stimulation, it's a little trickier. Deep brain stimulation involves a medical device. The medical device currently approved is made by Medtronics. It's been approved since 1997 in an increasing set of uses. But medical devices, like drugs, are available for off-label use. It's approved for one purpose, but once it's approved for one thing, a doctor can use it for anything else he or she thinks appropriate, because that's the holy practice of medicine into which the FDA says it will not tread. It says sort of disingenuously it will not tread, but in terms of off-label use, they clearly don't want to go there for lots of reasons. So if you take the deep brain stimulation and it's approved, the device is approved for Parkinson's, you can probably legally use it for any other purpose, as long as a doctor is willing to take responsibility for it. Now, I say probably because the FDA has taken the position that it wants to see what are called IDEs, investigational device exemptions, permissions to do research. IND is the equivalent in the drug world, for new uses of deep brain stimulation. If you are doing research, they want you to ask their permission. If you are doing clinical practice, though, they say they have no jurisdiction. Where's the line between clinical practice and research? In the twilight zone. In the eye of the beholder, maybe in the eye of your IRB, although often you might not even take it to the IRB. You just say, hey, I'm just tweaking my practice a little bit. This is a new practice modality. It's not research. Ironically, it's easier to do it legally if you don't do it in a carefully controlled manner with research, and you don't collect a lot of data, and you don't publish your results. Then you're less likely to have the FDA say you were doing research without an IDE. So, not a very good control. Vaccines, I think, are well controlled. It's hard for me to imagine that there'll be much off-label use of vaccines for these purposes. It's conceivable. Maybe somebody will decide that the DPT vaccine, or maybe the new herpes virus vaccine, maybe someone will conclude, oh, this reduces violent behavior, and use it off-label for that purpose. But for the most part, I think the vaccines are likely to be much more narrowly tailored to a particular use, for which they will require FDA approval. So I think it's less of a problem with vaccines. You get to drugs, and it's an enormous problem again because of the off-label use. Chemical castration is not just used in the US. It's also used in much of Europe, particularly Northern Europe. Northern Europeans also use a lot more surgical castration. They seem much more into castration than Southern Europeans. I'm not sure what that means or where that comes from. But in Europe, they typically use a different drug, not Depo-Provera. It's not used in the US because it's not FDA approved for any purpose in the US. Depo-Provera is approved by the FDA for contraceptives in the US, and therefore can legally be used for this non-contraceptive use. Although note, if it is effective in preventing these men from having sex, it does ultimately have a contraceptive effect, but that's not what it's being used for. Okay? So with drugs, off-label use is broadly available, and any doctor with prescription authority who decides that a drug can be used, might have this interesting use, is free to do it, subject only to his potential malpractice liability. So, we don't have a lot of legal control. We have, if you want to come up with a brand new chemical entity and say, I want this, it's not approved for anything else, I'm going to try it for controlling violence, then you'd probably have to go to, then you would have to go through the FDA, or you should have to go through the FDA. Footnote, unless you can say it's a dietary supplement, which is the largest loophole of all, in which case you won't need to go through the FDA, but you'll need something that can be taken orally. So we have lots of loopholes in terms of control of safety and efficacy. Is this a problem? I think already it is. And I'm going to go back to the example of chemical castration. As I said, 7 states require this. Texas allows surgical castration in some cases. 4 of those 7 states also allow someone to opt for surgical rather than chemical castration. but apparently they don't have a lot of takers. With the usual protocol, you need a shot every X weeks. So it's not a permanent thing. It is reversible if you stop getting the shots. Is it safe and effective? The FDA has said it's safe and effective for contraception in women. The safety is unknown. Now, it's been used for a long time to treat men with inappropriate sexual behaviors. It blocks testosterone, basically. And it does have some physiological effects. It makes erection and ejaculation more difficult, for some men impossible, for some men not. Apparently it has, according to the people who use it, will often have huge mental effects. They will say, I used to only think about sex and now I don't care. And you can show them pornography and many of them don't respond to it the way they previously would have. So it is a brain drug. It's not a penis drug, it's a brain drug. No one has studied systematically, as far as I can tell, the safety of its use in men. And what makes that more troublesome is two things. First, the men are getting this in doses 8 to 40 times higher than the doses that are given to women for contraceptive purposes. And second, as a contraceptive, Depo-Provera now has a black box warning. The highest level of warning that the FDA puts on something that it still allows to be marketed, because it's been associated with bone demineralization, which is in turn associated with osteoporosis. Now, women, it is known, have a higher rate of osteoporosis than men, so maybe men won't have this problem, but maybe after 20 years of Depo-Provera at high dose, men's bones will turn to dust. Maybe not. We don't know. And nobody's looking to find out. Now, of course, we know that it's been used enough. We know that men don't immediately die, keel over and die when they get the injection. We know that body parts don't fall off randomly. We know that it's safe. We have some anecdotal evidence that at some gross level it's fairly safe. But we don't know what it's doing to these people. And we don't care because they're sex offenders. What about efficacy? I mean, maybe it's still, hell, they're sex offenders. If it's effective, it's a good thing. Unfortunately, we don't know a lot about that either. We know a lot about the efficacy of surgical castration. Heavily used from the 20s through the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s in Northern Europe. Data's good, not surprisingly, I suppose. Somehow, I have German ancestry, so I think I can say this. The Germans had the best data on this. Lots of big trials. And they show recidivism rates of men who have been castrated at depending on the trial, between 0% and 11%. And these are for offenses where recidivism rates are often in the 60, 70, 80, 90% level. Now, one problem is there are lots of different kinds of sex offenses and sex offenders, and they have different etiologies, and they have different recidivism rates, and this is sort of a lump sum, but still it's pretty impressive. It's not zero, which is kind of surprising, but it's pretty impressive. With chemical castration, there are far fewer trials, published studies, and they have much smaller n's, and they have widely varying results. So one published study showing 4% recidivism, which is spectacular, and one showing 83% recidivism, which maybe made things worse, although the n's are so small that who knows. Now, on the chemical castration, I should point you in the direction of the source of most of my information about this, a wonderful article by a young law professor named John Stanford at St. Thomas University School of Law, who did a great job looking into all this. But I've done some background research of my own following up on his, and I don't see good evidence of the efficacy of this. So we don't know whether it's effective. It's plausible that it's effective. It makes sense that it's effective. There are clinical reports that it's effective. But is it effective long run? We don't really know. Now, let me throw in two more things about safety and efficacy. One is a political economy matter. If you're using this on criminals or other people we despise, nobody's going to care very much. Legislatures are happy to do things to be tough on crime and on criminals. And the criminals union